My name is Janell Wehr, and I am the Division of Extension Horticulture Educator in Marathon County. Thanks for joining us. Today, we'll go over key aspects to keep in mind when you have limited gardening space. First, we'll talk a bit about choosing the right varieties. Then we'll dive into some general techniques before getting into the specifics for container, square foot, straw bale, and vertical gardening. Some of these techniques you can use alone and some combine rather well. Let's get started. This photo is from the Wisconsin Rapids Community Garden. When thinking about crops you want to grow, choose compact varieties. Many of the vining crops also have bush varieties. You will find bush or semi-bush varieties in winter and summer squashes, cucumbers, beans, melons, and pumpkins. They may also be called patio varieties. When choosing a tomato variety, choose a determinate tomato. Determinate tomatoes will flower and produce its yield over a short period and then be finished for the season. Indeterminate tomatoes are vining varieties. These are the tomatoes that can grow up to 7 feet tall under the right conditions. Indeterminate tomatoes require staking and take larger spaces. Determinate tomatoes are better for small spaces. However, they'll stop producing earlier. One benefit of determinate tomatoes is you'll have your crop all at once. So if you choose to put up tomatoes either by canning or freezing or drying, they'll all be ready at once, and you won't need to wait for your tomatoes to ripen. Beyond compact varieties, you will also find dwarf varieties. For example, Red Robin is a dwarf cherry tomato that can grow in a 6-inch pot. Here in the picture, you can see where I grew a Red Robin. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it at maturity, but this pot was suitable all throughout the growing season. Now, be advised, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Sometimes when a plant is bred for a certain characteristic like size or shelf life, its taste is reduced. I didn't find Red Robin to be a particularly tasty cherry tomato, but it was fun to grow because of its unique size. You'll want to get the most bang for your buck, so grow high-yielding vegetables like tomatoes, lettuce, summer squash, and edible pod peas. If you have very limited space, stay away from corn, broccoli, and cauliflower. Corn requires many plants for proper pollination. Broccoli and cauliflower are mostly one and done, meaning you'll get a single harvest, and that's about it. Some broccoli varieties will produce nice side shoots after that initial harvest. So if you can't live without broccoli plants, choose a variety that will produce those secondary shoots after your first harvest. You'll also want to be sure to choose disease-resistant varieties whenever possible. Interplant fast-maturing crops like lettuce, radishes, spinach, and beets with slow-maturing crops like tomatoes and squash. If you're planting lettuce in the ground, use wide beds rather than rows. Plan to replace early crops like lettuce and radishes with beans or chard in midsummer. This is called successive gardening. Don't forget, cool season crops can be planted in midsummer for a fall harvest. By applying successive planting, you can use the same space over 3 seasons and get more crop variety out of the same space. Here we have lettuce interplanted with onions. The lettuce will be harvested in a couple of weeks, while the onions will continue to grow over the season. As the onions get larger, the gardener will harvest some while letting the others grow and fill in that space. When you plant in containers, keep in mind you will need to water daily and sometimes twice a day. Soil mixes in containers will not retain moisture as well as soil in the ground. Soil in a container will also be warmer than in the ground, causing the soil moisture to evaporate more quickly. It's important to think about where your water source is. Is it convenient? Try to avoid shallow watering. Water all containers until the water comes out of the bottom of the pot. Try to avoid getting the foliage wet. When you want to water the soil, not the leaves. Excess moisture on plant leaves will encourage fungal diseases. There are unlimited options available for containers. You can purchase containers or repurpose items around the house. Just be sure if the container doesn't already have drainage holes. You add plenty before planting. In really small spaces like window boxes, you can plant herbs and edible flowers. Many herbs can be grown in 6-inch pots. For larger plants, rely on buckets, bags, or large pots. One benefit of container gardening is you can choose where to put the pot. Just be aware with large pots, once it's filled with your potting medium, it can become very heavy. Carefully choose their final home. Elevate your containers off the ground so that way they'll drain appropriately. And 2x4s work well here. You don't want to use soil from your yard in containers. True soil will become too compacted in a container environment, causing the roots to become unable to take up nutrients appropriately. You can purchase a soilless potting mix, or you can make your own using peat moss, perlite, or vermiculite, and add compost or rotted manure. Be sure to check out the handout Container Gardening by H.C. Harrison at the Learning Store on the UW Extension website. At the end of the publication, there are handy charts which list the size of the container needed for each crop. It also lists crops that are suitable for hanging baskets. Speaking of hanging baskets, here's a picture of 3 ever-bearing strawberry plants I put in a hanging basket. Some crops are well suited for hanging baskets, and some compact determinate varieties of tomatoes do nicely. A couple of varieties that come to mind are patio and tumbler. Now let's switch gears and talk about square foot gardening. Square foot gardening is an intensive production system, meaning you can yield up to 5 times as much produce in an equal amount of space using traditional row planting. You start with a raised bed and then divide the growing space into 1 square foot sections and intensively plant within each square. When you create your grid, you can use strings or wooden slats to mark the squares. They can be removable or permanent depending on your preference. You can add a trellis on the back end of the garden bed. Lattice works nicely. You'll want to take some time and think about how you plan to organize the garden bed. Make sure that you put the tallest plants on the north side so they do not shade out your sun-loving plants. When choosing wood for the sides of the bed, be sure not to use wood treated with copper arsenate. It's unclear whether or not the copper arsenate will leach into the soil or the plants, but it can irritate the skin when it comes into contact. Pressure treated wood would work better. The width of the bed should be no more than 4 feet. More than 4 feet will become difficult to reach into the center of the bed. You can have beds longer than 4 feet. For most plants though, you want to make sure that the boards are 6 to 10 inches wide. That will be good for most vegetable plants. For tomato plants, you may want something a bit taller, up to 12 inches. Here you can see my garden from a few years ago. I used string to create my grids. Be sure if you use nails and string, you tamp down the nails, otherwise you'll end up with an arm or a knee scraped from the nails eventually. I speak from experience. One of the benefits of using raised beds with square foot gardening is there's no need to till. Since you're not walking on the soil doesn't get compacted. Compacted soils have less pore space, which means the soil is not able to retain air or moisture as well. Since the beds are only 4 feet wide, you can easily reach within 2 feet on each side. Accessibility is another benefit. Many gardeners find raised beds are easier to work in since they're elevated from ground height. You can even build a bed at waist height, making it accessible for folks in walkers and wheelchairs. The picture at the top is the accessible beds at Swepp's Food Pantry in Wisconsin Rapids. You'll notice the beds are up off the ground, making it easier for volunteers to plant, water, and weed the garden bed. Below are accessible beds in a community garden in Wausau. Since you're intensively planting such a small space, diseases and pests can easily become problems. Choose your cultivars or cultivated varieties wisely, meaning you're going to want to make sure that you're using disease-resistant varieties. You don't want to use straight garden soil in a raised bed for the same reasons as container gardening. You can think of a raised bed as a large container. Instead, mix garden soil with compost, peat, and vermiculite. This will ensure good drainage and resistance to compaction. Even though there's compost in the mix, Extension recommends adding fertilizer to the growing medium. It could be used as a slow release or a liquid, or organic or synthetic. Just be sure that you read the label and follow the instructions carefully. Here I've shown the compost bins from one of the community gardens in Marshfield. If you don't have your own compost or you aren't already making your own compost, you can buy it bagged commercially. And there's also commercial bulk compost available. The spacing within each square foot is determined by the type of plant that you are growing. This is a chart taken from Arlen Arbrick's UW Extension publication, Square Foot Gardening. You can find that publication at the Learning Store. The chart on the left shows how many plants you can put in a square foot. For example, you can grow 16 radishes. See the 4 boxes on the right-hand side? The one on the upper left shows how you would plant 16 radishes in a square foot. The next box shows how you can fit 9 beans. The box on the lower left shows how 4 chards would easily fit in a square foot. A single plant in the center of the square would work best for larger plants like broccoli. Since plants will be growing in tight quarters, there's going to be good potential for plants to get diseases. Diseases can impact yield significantly, so you'll want to make sure that you choose disease-resistant varieties. Some crops will benefit from pruning to increase air circulation. You may also want to prune the bottom branches of tomato plants to avoid splashback. Some of the diseases are in the soil, and when water droplets from rain or overhead watering splash onto the soil, they bounce back against the leaves, bringing fungal spores with them. You can mitigate some of the splashback effect by pruning out those bottom branches. Another thing that'll help mitigate disease is a mulch layer. A mulch layer will provide a barrier, keeping more of those disease spores in the soil and away from the leaves of the plants. In this picture, you can see I've added a layer of straw on top of my garden. That mulch layer will also help prevent moisture loss through evaporation. Make sure you get straw instead of hay. Otherwise, you'll end up with a lot of weed seeds that may germinate and compete with your plants for resources like sunlight, water, and nutrients. When possible, rotate crops by plant families. Plant families are genetically related and have similar characteristics. This means that they usually have pests and diseases in common with each other. When vegetables classified in the same plant family are grown year after year in the same area of the garden, they provide insects with a reliable food source and disease-causing organisms like bacteria or fungus with a continual source of host plants that they can infect. Over time, the insects and diseases will build in an area, increasing the damage to vegetable crops. Using crop rotation helps keep insects and diseases at lower levels. Plus, the type of vegetables grown in a particular area in the garden has a direct effect on the fertility of the soil in that area. Each vegetable is unique in the type and amount of nutrients it extracts from the soil. Crop rotation can even out the loss of different soil nutrients and allow time for nutrients to replenish. If possible, you'll want to avoid planting the same crop in the same location year after year. It'd be helpful to have multiple beds. That way you could have proper crop rotation. For watering, soaker hoses work best because water is released slowly at the root level. The leaves don't get wet, and it reduces the potential for foliar diseases. If you don't have soaker hoses and have to use regular hoses, try to water the soil and not the leaves. Generally speaking, in-ground gardens perform best when they get at least 1 inch of water per week. Since raised beds are above the ground, the soil tends to get warmer and evaporation occurs more quickly. Typically, raised beds will need 2 inches of water per week, and in warm conditions, they might even need more. Now let's talk about straw bale gardening. Straw bale garden beds start with a bale of straw. The bale is first conditioned, and then vegetable plants are planted and grown inside the bale. A variety of crops can be grown in bales, including tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, squash, melons, and herbs. Bales are placed in the ground with no need to dig into the soil. There's a few benefits to straw bale gardening. If you have poor, compacted soil, or your soil is contaminated by disease or other contaminants like lead, straw bale gardening will get around those issues. If you don't have space for a garden in a full sun site, you can place a bale on concrete or asphalt. And if you have limited mobility, you might find straw bale gardening to be a perfect solution since the bales are over 2 feet tall. There's no kneeling and you can sit down. Another benefit of straw bale gardening is over container gardening is there's no container or potting mix to buy. You just need to find a source for cheap straw bales. Also, the bales are not permanent and can be used at the end of the season to enrich your soil. Start with straw bales, either wheat or oat straw. You'll want a bale that is held together with baling twine encircling the bale in 2 to 3 places. Old straw bales work well if the bales are held tightly together by the twine. Hay bales can be used, but they contain more weed seeds and grass seeds that will grow. So what you're going to want to do is find a location where the bales will get at least 6 or more hours of full sun. If you're placing the bales on lawn or bare soil, place 4 to 5 sheet sections of newspaper on the ground under the bales, leaving several inches sticking out along the base of the bales. This will help prevent grass and weed growth at the bottom of the bales. So situate the bales so the twine is on the side and the cut side faces upwards. Deciding on the placement of your garden is important first because once you start watering those bales, you're not going to be able to move them. Just keep in mind that taller plants will need to go on the north end of the straw bale, just like in any other garden. Water the new bales thoroughly and keep them wet for 3 days. Keeping the bales moist is very important. As the inside of the bales begin to decompose, they'll start to warm up. This is part of the conditioning process. On days 4, 5, and 6, sprinkle the top of the bale with 1 cup of ammonium sulfate. That will be 2100. Or a half a cup of urea, and that'll be 4600. Watering the fertilizer in well after the application. This speeds up the decomposition. On days 7, 8, and 9, cut the amount of fertilizer per bale in half. On day 10, start adding the fertilizer, but keep those bales moist. On day 11, feel the top of the bale and check for heat. If it's still hot, check every day until it cools down to about body temperature or even lower. You want to make sure that you're keeping the bales moist in that time too. Once the bales are cool to the touch, you can plant your bale garden. If you're unsure, you can use a meat thermometer to measure the heat several inches down inside of the bale. If weeds, oatgrass, or alfalfa start to sprout in your bales, Remove the plants while they're small. Because straw is decomposing, mushrooms will probably sprout from the bale. You don't need to remove them, but they could be poisonous, so don't eat them. I found a video I'd like to share with you that shows the process nicely. Bear with me for a moment. I'm going to switch my screen. I'm sorry. First, I apologize. I first have to share my share the sound from my video.
Straw bales. Typically, straw bales are preferred over hay bales because they have less weed.
Sorry about that. Let's try that again. Jackie, can you hear it?
Are you tired of fighting with poor garden soil? Or perhaps you live in a temporary situation where you don't want to invest in building a raised bed? Well, we may have the solution for you if that's the case, and this is called straw bale gardening. Basically, it's planting in straw bales. Typically, straw bales are preferred over hay bales because they have less weed seeds. Now, they still may have some weed seeds, but they have fewer weed seeds in them. You can see here we have 8 straw bales, and you want to place them up on end so the twine is actually going around the bale, and what traditionally would be the long side of the straw bale is actually going to be our top side. So this is so we can have plenty of space to plant in. You want to make sure to keep them twined up or whether it's wire or twine, keep them attached because that's what's going to hold that bale together. Now, if you have new bells, there's a process that we need to do called conditioning these bells, and that's going to take about 14 days. If you're planting this with a warm season crop in mid-April, you're going to want to start this process towards the end of March or the beginning of April so that you're ready to plant as soon as possible. When we condition these straw bales, what we're doing is we're starting a process of decomposition. You can see straw bales are made of a lot of straw and carbon material, and basically if we don't condition them prior to planting, any fertilizer or nutrients that we add to this, the microbes are going to tie it up immediately and not make it available for our plants. So by starting the conditioning process, that's going to start that decomposition and allow there to be some nutrients available for our plants when we plant them. So how do we do that? Again, the conditioning process takes about 14 days, and what you're going to do is every other day for 14 days, you're going to spread some urea or high nitrogen fertilizer across the top of the bales of straw. While you're applying the high nitrogen fertilizer every other day for 14 days, you want to make sure to water your straw bales every day for 14 days. Now that we've got our bales nice and soaked, and you do want to soak them thoroughly because you want to help get that nitrogen fertilizer down into that bale of hay or straw. Because what you're doing is you're creating an exothermic reaction of decomposition. So we're going to start breaking down that organic straw material with that nitrogen fertilizer. Now in this process, the straw bales are going to heat up over those 14 days. And so you can monitor when it peaks at heat. You can use soil probes such as what we have here. You can also kind of divide it and push your hand down in there and actually feel a warmer temperature down in the straw bale. It will peak in the 14 days, and then usually around the 14th day it'll start cooling off. And at this point, you know that reaction has taken place. Your straw bale is starting to decompose, and so any additional fertilizer that you apply on your straw bale won't necessarily be completely tied up by those microbes. So at this point, then we could start planting. So for now, we've got our straw bales started, and we'll come back and water them every day for 14 days, and we'll fertilize them every other day for 14 days. For more information on how to start a straw bale garden or what you can plant in one, check out this fact sheet.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.
I also included some publications on the list of links that'll go over how much fertilizer, what was the analysis, all of that's in those publications for you. Straw bales should be ready for planting in 3 to 4 weeks after conditioning begins. Plant seedlings just like you would if they were in the ground. If it says to plant 18 inches apart, then it's the same for the bale. You'll take a sharp trowel, just like she did in the video, and separate the straw. Place the plant down to the first leaf and let the straw fill in around it. You want to be careful not to cut the twine when planting. If you want to plant seeds like beans, place a small layer of compost mixed with soil on the top of the bale, like icing on a cake, and then plant the seeds directly into the soil. Cover the seeds with a light dusting of soil or peat moss and water in well. When planting tomatoes, you'll want to stake them with a 6-foot stake because cages won't work as well to support the plant. Keep the bales moist by watering them daily and don't let the bales dry out. If the bales aren't kept moist by sprinklers, porous soaker hoses will work well. The straw doesn't provide all of the essential nutrients needed for plant growth like soil or premium potting mixes do. So straw bales will need to be fertilized once a week using a water-soluble fertilizer containing nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and then of course some micronutrients as well. The oldest leaves of vegetable plants turn yellowish if they're deficient in nitrogen. Nitrogen deficiency is common when growing plants in straw bales. The bales will typically only last for 1 growing season, maybe 2 at most. So at the end of the growing season, when the growing season is over and the crops have been harvested, the bales can be recycled by placing in the compost pile, or you can work the rotted soil directly into the soil. Perhaps you've got a perennial bed. Vining vegetables like cucumbers, pole beans, melons, and tomatoes benefit from using cages and staking, not only to help save space, but also for disease control and aiding in the harvesting. Some plants naturally have tendrils and will attach themselves to the structure, while others will need to be trained, which means tied up right onto the structure. Be careful with the material that you choose to use to train the plant. If you use something too thin like fishing line or maybe string, you might end up cutting and injuring the plant. Be sure to install your supports at planting. Don't wait until the plant needs a structure. Plants have a tendency to break when you try to add a stake or try to add a cage or a stake after they start to grow. If you've ever tried to cage a tomato once it's grown, you know what I'm talking about. Plant injuries leave opportunities for pathogens like fungus or bacteria that can infect that plant. When growing heavy vegetables like squash or melons, tie old cloths or nylons under the fruit to support it, and that'll help keep it from falling off the vine. Be aware of shadows from vertical plantings. Will they shade out your sun-loving plants? although you may find that to be useful for some shade-tolerant plants like lettuce or peas that'll bolt if it gets too warm. Here we've got a picture of some vertical gardens that I took at O'Hare Airport. This one is located in one of the terminals, I think Terminal 5. They use these systems use hydroponics to grow herbs and small vegetables. I found a couple of short videos that I'd like to share that offer great examples of vertical growing systems. In the first video, Master Gardener and Certified Professional Horticulturalist Shelley McNeil shows off her vertical garden and an alternative way to grow your own food. Her system also uses hydroponics. Please bear with me while I switch my screens.
Well, this is my vertical growing system, and I thought I would tell you about it. I ordered the system from Florida, and it's a stackable system of styrofoam containers, and they're sitting catty-cornered one on top of another. There's 4 white ones and then the 1 round one on top. And the way the system works is you plant your seeds or your little transplants in the corners of all of these boxes. So there's 4 planting spots on each box. And the media in here is not soil, it's coir, which is coconut fiber that is just a loose media that allows water to drain through it, but it has no nutrition. And the way the plants are watered is through a hydroponic system. This tubing that's running across the top is watering each of the 4 stacks. And the way that works is the water squirts into the top pot, and then it drains through holes in the bottom of the round pot and then through holes in each of the styrofoam pots. And once all of the pots have been watered, we'll see water dripping out of the bottom, and that tells us that all of the stack has been thoroughly saturated. I'd like to show you the tank I have over here that contains the water and the nutrients that the system uses. This is totally hydroponic. We bought this trash can and drilled a hole in the top. And then this tubing goes into the trash can, and in the bottom is a pump that pumps the water up through the tubing. We fill the trash can probably 2 times a week with water, and at that time we also add in our fertilizers. And like I said, this green bag has a higher nitrogen to phosphorus ratio, so it's a 10-5-14. And then when it's time for things to bloom, I switched over to this formula, which is a 5-15-14. So the phosphorus is higher. There is a plug over here plugged into a timer. So the system comes on automatically. We can set it to do it as many times as we want. So we do about 4 times a day, 10 minutes each time. But it does depend on the temperature and the rainfall, whether or not we want to run it that many times. But I really like the system for many reasons. One, it's very easy to maintain. There's no weeding to be done with the plants, which in my opinion is wonderful, especially for people like myself who has arthritis and it's hard to bend, it's painful to bend. This system is ideal. And the other thing that was interesting was pest control. I felt there weren't as many pests on these plants as there were in my plants in the garden. So I think they were easier to control at this height. If I saw any eggs, they were right at my eye level. I could squash them and kill them so that the insects didn't even hatch out. But I also think just being vertical and up off the ground had a lot to do with it. One of the things I wanted to point out about the system is whether or not it would feed your family. If you have a family of 2, this system might be adequate, but if you were going to feed a larger family, I would definitely recommend that you have more than just 4 stacks. You probably need at least 8 stacks. Even though it's an expensive system initially, I spent about $300 on this system. I feel as I use it year after year after year, it's going to pay for itself in the long run. and it's portable. So if we ever move, we just take our portable stack with us and we're ready to go.
Here we go. I have one more video to share with you. This one's really interesting. This is a master gardener from Colorado State Extension, and he shares a lot of cool different ways to go about trellising and training your plants to grow. Let's turn that down a little bit.
We'll talk about trellising today, and I wanted to show you an older form of trellising that may have been used in the Roman days. The Romans were really big on doing architectural beautification of the roses and plants that crawl along the ground, and they wanted them up. So here's one example that we might have seen back in Roman times. It's called a pergola. The reason it's called a pergola, it has a false roof. We see here that we have grapevines growing up the false roof, and they will cover the top from all the four posts. And not only that, as the grapes flower and ripen, they will fall through the top and be easy to harvest, and that's very important with trellising. However, I want to show you something we see more often today. These are tomato cages, common everyday tomato cages. However, they're also trellising because we put the tomatoes, which are a plant that grows along the ground, in the cages to have them come up. And as they come up, we're able to reach in the openings to grab the fruit. We can trim the tomato to keep the size we want. Plus, it keeps the plant and the tomatoes themselves clean and easy to harvest. And now we'll show you another form of trellising here in our horticulture garden. This is called an espalier. An espalier simply is the trimming of this apple trees along the fence. And we put bamboo posts here that we attach them to, and we're able then, eventually this apple trees, set of apple trees, will actually fill in the fence and be beautiful, pretty flowers, everything that you want. And we see this kind of trellising more in where we have fenced-in areas that we want to divide gardens. And then we'll come down here and show you another form of trellising. This is simply a wire fence attached to posts. We're doing this so we can grow plants that will require crawling up, and it will follow it all the way up to the top. And again, we can reach the fruit, we can keep the plant clean, we can weed easily. Trellising is many advantages, and that's them. And then we'll come down to another form of trellising, which is this dome. This dome happens to be set for peas. The peas will come up, attach themselves with the tendrils to the fence and bring up all the way, and will come up on both sides and meet in the middle. Again, it's easy to weed, it's easy to get the fruit, and we have a clean plant. Here's another form of trellising. These are the fence posts, and then we have a long cable line around it. Now, we can do the top one, and we can add also other cable lines to it. So the plants come up, they'll grab the cable, move up to the next level. We use this for peas, we can use this for blueberries, we can anything that's willing to crawl up, we'll use this form. And over here, we have another form of cage. Although it's very thin, we have raspberries hooked to it, so that will go up the cage to the end, and when we can trim it again and get to the fruit and everything we need to do. And last but not least is this cable form, which is a modification of this. We have 3 layers here, and we have raspberries attached to it to grow up. So those are some of the forms we use here in a horticulture garden. But also I need to make sure that it's clear that if you're going to trellis, you need to do your trellising early in the spring. Either reform an old trellis you don't like, or put new trellises in before you plant the seed, or the plants that are already existing start to bud, because they'll need that to get started and start up trellising the right way. Thank you.
Okay, so again, I like how he ends that with just sharing, make sure you put your trellising in first. Don't wait until later on in the season to take care of that. Well, that's about all I have for today. And if you've got any questions at all or any questions about gardening in general, please feel free to reach out to me. My name's Janell Wehr. My email address is my first name dot last name. So that's JANELL.WEHR@WISC.edu. Thank you. And thank you, Jackie, for inviting me to share today.
And I will also add, if you have any questions and you can't get straight through to Janell, you can just contact the local Wood County Extension office and we will connect it to Janell. So you can either pop in and leave us a voicemail message or on either the Facebook page or send any of us an email and we'll get it over to Janell. Thank you.
Thank you.